Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Thursday, July 6, 2023. I'm Brad Eli, here with my two co-hosts, Simon Rafe and Kyle Copey. And joining us today in the fourth chair is Rodney Pelletier. Hey, Rodney. Hey. This actually is your second time on The Download this year, I think.
Yes, second time. Probably not the last, though.
Hopefully. We'll see how you do today if you ever get, booted.
Trying to make the team.
Trying to make the team. A.5, A- team. Canada. Oh, Canada. In the Canadian province of Manitoba, a court decision is upholding the ban on public worship during the COVID days. The Provincial Appeals Court has determined COVID lockdown orders that shattered churches did not violate religious freedom. The decision last month came in response to a constitutional challenge launched by 7 Protestant churches, communities, against Manitoba's decision to implement lockdown rules in March 2020. The church communities claimed the COVID mandates violated Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but the appeals court wasn't buying it. In its decision on June 19th, the court said, quote, freedom of religion can be limited when the exercise of it can interfere with the rights of others. In other words, the court's reasoning seems to be that going to church during a pandemic violates other people's rights to not get infected or something. So, Simon, fair or not, you think the right to shut down all the churches up there is a violation of other people's rights? I mean,
well, it's interesting. So we were here and a couple of days ago, I think, and Dave Gordon was making the distinction between positive rights and negative rights. Okay. And he was talking about the structure, of course, that we have in the United States, where we have the Bill of Rights, but the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, particularly, obviously, like the First Amendment, very importantly, doesn't really create rights. What it does is just acknowledges the existence of these rights. So the United States government is acknowledging the existence of, in this particular case, freedom of religion, and the free exercise thereof.
And the Constitution doesn't give me a free will. It recognizes that I have dignity.
Exactly. That's the point. Sure. You see, it doesn't say that, hey, this Constitution is granting these things to you, Brad. It says, hey, the Constitution recognizes that you have these, and the government may not infringe on these rights that you have. Now, that's that kind of structure that we have here in the United States, like I said, in the Bill of Rights, particularly in the First Amendment there. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I'm not intimately familiar with that, but clearly that's not how the court is interpreting that. The court is not coming along and saying, hey, you've got this right and we just sort of acknowledge it and we see it. It's like, well, we're granting you these rights, which means, well, he who giveth, he can also taketh away. And also, the thing that you read, freedom of religion can be limited when the exercise of it can interfere with the rights of others. Okay, so this is an interesting take. Very different from the standard that's usually done within the United States when they're talking about these rights that can be interfered with. Because, of course, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't disseminate national secrets, unless, of course, you're Joe Biden and you're keeping them there next to your Camaro in the garage. But you can't slander people. And these are just all the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. Obviously, as well, there's also the case that your religion does not give you complete freedom to do whatever you like. You can't go around and say, well, by the way, I'm a thuggee, so I'm going to go around and start straight up murdering people because that's what my religion says. Also, you can't come along and say I'm a Native American and the use of hallucinogenic substances is part of my religion and just get a free pass to do whatever you want with that. Those things are regulated and controlled.
I'll have to get rid of my hallucinogenics then because, the partial...
The partial thing there. But interestingly, usually the rule in the United States is the government needs to show a compelling government interest in order to do so, in order to limit these rights, and also it needs to show that this is the least restrictive method of doing it. Obviously, Canada, very different position. So is Canada right? Canada is kind of doing it according to its own rules.
Okay, so I have another question. Say, Rodney, if we have the freedom of religion can be limited when the exercise of it can interfere with the rights of others, what do you suppose are the rights of others there? The rights of others to come to church, okay? Right. And that was my thing. If you wanted to come to church and you don't want to catch COVID, I guess you were supposed to get the vax. The vax was supposed to protect you from catching COVID, right? So how am I, if I don't have the vax or if I'm there or whatever, why can't you come to church? Because the vax was supposed to cure all, end all, be all. And that's a wonderful thing. We're pro-vax here, okay? And
I've been jabbed 42 times.
42 times. I've gotten vaccines, all types of vaccines. So the thing is, just common sense though. If you want to come to church, you should be protected by that, right? Because the government wouldn't lie to you about that. You're protected. So what am I infringing upon if you and I get together at church? How are we getting? What's being infringed here?
Yeah, it seems like it's very. They're being very selective with their pro jab agenda. They're like, yes, you can only come to church if you get this. And that's how they were. They had people. I know people had to sign up ahead of time. You had to call ahead, and then they'd only allow so many people in church, and you're on the thing, so you couldn't go to church every Sunday and everything.
See, I'm granting right off the bat that the vaccines, whatever they're trying to do, they do. Let's just grant that for the argument and say that that's all in place. So just common sense then, who's getting infringed here? And what right are we infringing? I don't know. Simon, you're kind of a smart cookie. What right?
Well, bear in mind, of course, this was March 2020 and the vaccines came out in the fall and winter of 2020. So obviously the vaccine wasn't here. The right here, I think, as you said, the right here is the right to not be infected, which is interesting. So the argument being used, to put it within context, is that a mass gathering of individuals will spread a respiratory virus. A mass gathering of individuals will spread a respiratory virus. If you limit the number of individual contacts a person has, you will limit the spread of a respiratory virus like this. Which is true and is perfectly legitimate. There was actually a thing said by, I think it was Governor Whitmer, who said in March 2020, she said, if everybody could just stop and stand where they are for 2 weeks, this virus would go away. Because the argument was that after 10 days, you were no longer infectious, that you had run its course, and that's it. Okay, if everyone stood still for 2 weeks, the virus would have run its course, and everyone would be dead because they would have no food. So obviously, so the argument was that you would go and you would say, well, these are essential services, so you can go out to go shopping, you can go out to have food deliveries and all these kinds of things. The problem is when you're dealing with a virus like COVID, which was very infectious and still is, it's like it doesn't actually stop the transmission in any meaningful sense. That we didn't see any substantial differences between communities that were very locked down and communities that were not locked down in terms of their spreading vector. I mean, I think the thing is, at this point, what they're doing is they're looking back at 2020, March 2020, and the decisions they made at the time, good, bad, and different decisions. They made these decisions. They made them according to the Canadian rules regarding religious freedom, which are not nearly as free as we have here in the United States. And yeah, it's like the right of another to not be infected. It's the right to say, okay, well, you shouldn't be going to this mass gathering while you're all glad-handing and hugging and kissing and singing, and you're all spreading this thing, in a way that we deem to be very likely that you're going to get this virus at this place, and then you're going to be going to places like a doctor's surgery, like a grocery store and so forth, and spreading it to individuals who have chosen to stay away from the churches. That's their argument. Yeah. I think just kind of looking at it here, this isn't a question of saying that their decision was good, bad, or indifferent. The decision it's looking at this decision saying, Canada allows this to happen because they don't have a Bill of Rights. Yeah. That's the point. It's they don't, or they have something that's like the Bill of Rights, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but you know what? It isn't interpreted the same way. It's not the same as the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah. Kyle, what's your take on it?
Well, I mean, the whole idea of arguing that, okay, we're going to do this to stop or even slow the spread was ridiculous, because you have to look at what we're trying to slow the spread of. This wasn't the bubonic plague. This wasn't Ebola. This is, by all accounts, a very non-lethal illness that really didn't affect most people. Yes, many people died from it, and I'm acknowledging that.
If you have comorbidities.
If you have comorbidities, yeah, but it's a very small fraction of the population. Most people would be fine with it, suffering and whatnot. So to stop it is kind of like, how are you actually going to do that? If you had the free decision to go out and do the things you wanted to do, you can take that risk upon yourself. I mean, that's the whole idea of freedom, right? And it gets back to the fact of, okay, what rights are we interfering with people here? Interfere with the rights of others. So my question is, how was going to church, how how is me going to church interfering with the rights of other people?
If I didn't want to get infected, I wouldn't go to
Yeah,
church.
no one.
To be healthy or
Exactly.
something?
No one's, I mean, yes, there's a Catholic obligation to go to Mass on Sundays, but no one is forcing you, from the government is forcing you to go into a church. It wasn't like a public open square that everyone has to go to. So me going there, whether I'm infected or not, is going to have no bearing on, whether I'm responsible for infecting other people and whether the government's responsible for allowing that.
Well, let's take it down to America now. There was a Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Dolan. Mm-hmm. He wrote a piece in our Sunday Visitor, and this was on June 30th. And the question is, did we go too far with COVID-19 restrictions? And what exactly he's talking about there is with regard to churches.
Did we, the bishops, or we just in general?
Bishop,
Okay,
it's the royal we that he and.
But no. I mean, is that he's saying we, the bishops?
He's basically the Catholic leadership. Okay, did we go too far? And spoiler alert, he never answers the question. And the Spark Notes, yes, you did go too far. So now we're no longer talking about
at the TV. That's why
we're no longer talking about Canada. We're back in the good old USA here, and the courts have said time and again, yes, you can't lock that down. And here it was such an oxymoron, because they were saying, well, you could go to places of gambling, and you could do other places, but
you could have an abortion too.
You could have an abortion,
but no,
you can't.
But remember what happened. The government did not lock down the Catholic churches. The government didn't do that.
The bishops did that.
The bishops did that because the First Amendment says, that there are certain groups and certain things that freedom should not be infringed. And so there was this whole thing that it was like, okay, you can't go to work, you can't go do stuff unless you are part of an essential, and it was an essential business. The list of essential businesses on paper covered practically every single person with employment. Here in Southeast Michigan, it covered like 99% of people, because what it was, okay, we deem the car industry to be essential, which is, okay, fine, you deem the car industry to be essential, and then it was, and those who support the car industry, which in Southeast Michigan is 99% of the population. Welcome to Motown, everyone.
This is what Dolan wrote. He says, now I find myself undertaking an examination of conscience. Did we as a church here in the United States go too far in obeying, he says, all the restrictions imposed, he says, during the COVID pandemic, resulting in a lack of pastoral care for those sick.
So he was just following orders.
Right there, he's already, this is a wonderful piece, right there he already is passing the buck and saying this was imposed upon us.
Especially when they didn't. When it was clear from the get-go that religious communities were exempt from any sort of lockdown because of the First Amendment. That was the whole thing. It was the bishops who decided it. This is why I'm on record as saying there are no good bishops, because every single one of them locked down within 48 hours? Yeah. They just said, no, we're done with Mass. Yeah. And it's like, not, hey, we're giving you a blanket dispensation. If you are worried about this disease, which is a horrible and dangerous disease, and bear in mind in March, we knew very little about it, if you want to be able to say, well, I don't feel comfortable coming to Mass because of the risks, fine, there's a dispensation. But to say, well, there is no Mass, there is no sacraments. Oh, somebody's died? Oh, I guess they don't get a funeral. Somebody's sick? They don't get anointing of the sick.
You can't get married.
You can't get confession.
Yeah. That was a crime.
Yes.
A priest I spoke to during that time, I asked him what he thought of it, and he turned to me. He was walking away, and he said I would say a little bit of anger, righteous anger. He said, what the bishops are doing is a crime. He used that phrase, a crime.
Canonically, certainly. Canonically, certainly. I mean, there's
pretty amazing. Yeah.
So this is another Dolan passing the buck here. He says in this piece, now remember the title is quite, did we go too far? He never really comes to the question, but he keeps throwing these little things in there. He says, I am glad we were attentive and realized that we have a moral duty to listen to prudent medical cautions coming from Fauci and protect our people, especially our elders and those in fragile health. So he does say, but I ask myself, were we equally obedient to the biblical commands to be near the sick, to comfort the dying, to reverently bury the dead, and for us deacons, priests, and bishops to bring the sacraments and the church's prayerful accompaniment to those very sick from the virus? Well, the answer is yes. You were wrong in that. Were you obedient? Actually, no, you were not. So the fact is that it's just a masterful way. Then he does bring up 3 individuals. Aloysius Gonzaga, who died, it was on his feast day, he just happened to write this homily, that died from contracting a virus while ministering to victims of plague in Rome. Then he brings up the Shreveport martyrs, 5 young priests in France who contracted disease when, and then also Malachi Martin, not Malachi Martin, sorry.
Damien Malachi.
Father Damien Malachi.
Wrong
Malachi Martin I know very well, and he didn't die from that. So anyway, but he brings up these individuals. I don't know, you see the psychology of it. Well, this guy, he helped, and he died. And these people, they helped, and they died. And this person, they helped, and he died. So, did we do the right thing or not?
No.
Yeah, well, that's the whole point. They died doing their vocation, doing their job, doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and they contracted, whatever it is, and that ended up in their death. But these people they're doing it the right way. To just say no mass, no anything, without any mandates from the government, even if the government mandated, the bishops should have been like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like we've said before, if people weren't comfortable coming to Mass, the bishops aren't out there saying, you guys all have to go to Mass or else. Their bishops don't seem to care if people go to Mass or not. So that's not an issue. But the idea of shutting down all these churches, I think by the end of the week, there were public masses.
Yeah, everything
we had
was
a
officially
map
closed. Yep,
that we were following, and just it went black within
days.
There was
days.
an interesting report that we had, a video report. Go to our site and Google on our site, type in blackout.
Yeah.
Blackout will bring you up in March 2020, and it shows this dark shadow going right across, and it actually is chronologically correct in the diocese after diocese after diocese that are all shut down. I think Tyler, Texas was one of the last white light spots there, and I forget another diocese. And then everything was completely black on there. He asked his final paragraph on his letter. He says, finally, yet another part of me, right before this, he says, a big part of me remains grateful that we did more than our part. Notice how he says that, more than our part in obeying the severe restrictions. What you guys are alluding to here, that really wasn't that severe. So we did more than our part. I love the way he words this. In obeying the severe restrictions leveled during the pandemic, we did more than our part in obeying them.
Wow.
And for the careful vigilance rendered by our public servants. Their vigilance, like Fauci, who said do all this, or you don't really have to do it all. Anyway, the very last one here regarding these martyrs that he talks about, he said, yet another part of me worries that future decades, like my kids, will not look back at us with the same admiration we now have for St. Aloysius Gonzaga, St. Damien of Malachi, and those young martyrs of Shreveport. You think?
I was going to say,
really?
Look upon with the same admiration that we look upon ourselves right now.
It's just like the dumbest thing. You know what this is? This isn't even those martyrs. This is Quo Vadis. This is Quo Vadis. This is St. Peter, running out of Rome because he knows he's going to get persecuted. He runs out of Rome and he encounters Jesus on the street and says, Quo Vadis, Domine, where are you going, Lord? And Jesus says, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. Mm-hmm. The implication is, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again because you won't, you wuss. Right. And Peter is like, "Oi!" And Peter turns around and goes back and does this. Okay, that's why, to his credit, that's why Peter is a saint. Yes. Okay? Otherwise, it would have been like, yeah, Peter, good guy, but at the end, when the crunch happened, Peter got like nailed to a cross, okay, which I am reliably told is unpleasant. Now, you've got...
So did 32 of his followers.
Yeah,
The first 33 popes of the church all had a death sentence.
All a death sentence. And now there's Dolans sitting there going, okay, well, we shut everything down, you know, and like Damien of Molokai, yeah, he died of leprosy among the community of lepers. You know, I wonder, will people regard me as the same way as they did Damien of Molokai? It's like, I assure you that they will not.
No.
You know what? They don't regard you now. Don't worry about decades later, months later.
How will historians see us in
Months later, like now, like when it
the
was
same
happening.
way we see you as a
The blindness that these prelates labor under, the self-imposed blindness, I know it's hard to look at that and see there's any hope for these men.
Not much.
I don't understand this language of, oh, we went above and beyond.
I know, that's kind of weird, right? Kind of exactly what Simon Rodney were saying. The restrictions weren't quite as tight as you think they were.
Yes. Well, they did go above and beyond.
Well,
I mean, it's like, you know, we completely shut everything down.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's like they had some, you know, divine mandate to do this stuff when they're just making bad prudential decisions. At the end of the day, that's all they were doing. And yes, I understand that in the first few weeks, no one knew what was going on. We didn't have the data in yet. We had, you know, skewed data, I guess you could say, coming out of China. You can't really trust anything that's coming out of there. So when it came to the U.S., then the study started and say, okay, who does this affect? Okay, it's the LRD, comorbidities, all that. And then we actually learned about it. And within that first few weeks, first month, then we kind of knew, okay, who does this affect? How do we, you know, mitigate it? All these things. Was it surfaces? Probably not. We figured that out very early on. And everyone knew that. That was common knowledge. And so for the bishops to continue the lockdown after that, I think was very irresponsible. Also, they didn't give any guidance. It was just like a total blackout. There was no guidance as to how to fulfill your Sunday obligation. Yes, maybe parishes were putting things together with live stream masses, which was a horrible
Very
option.
hit and miss. It was up to the pastor to do something.
It was up to the pastor, but there was no, at least from what I saw from bishops out there was no like, okay, people, yes, you can't go to Mass because we've locked the doors, literally. We've done that to you, but here's what you still need to do to fulfill your Sunday obligation, because this is catechetical, this is in the Code of Canon Law. Even if you can't get to Mass, you still have to do something to fulfill your Sunday obligation.
The guy that backed that up was Cardinal Burke at the time. He said the bishops can't remove your Sunday obligation.
Yes.
They may mitigate it from being, satisfied by going to Mass on Sunday, but they can't remove this natural law that you have to do something to worship your God on a regular basis. And that Sunday obligation, he said, like just exactly what you said, they can't remove it, but then, okay, well, how do I fulfill it if you don't want me to fulfill it at Mass? Such as on Fridays. They could say, well, if you don't want to eat meat, that's fine, but you have to do some other form of penance.
Which the U.S. bishops have done.
Yeah.
Well, they haven't really been very clear on how to fulfill your Sunday or your Friday.
No, they have not.
It's very ambiguous.
Your penance on Friday penance. If you're gonna solve, I'm gonna eat meat on Friday, which they allow you to do, but you still have to do penance on Friday. On Friday,
But it's not clear what it is.
Most people don't think they have any penance, and most people back then didn't think they had a Sunday obligation, but they do. But so how do they fill it?
That's the thing. So people think it's just going to Mass. If I can't go to Mass, I don't have to do anything religious on Sunday. No, you still have to fulfill it. Again, it's that ambiguous language where the bishops, they said, okay, well, yeah, we've remitted the obligation to eat meat on Friday, but what the penance is, we're not really going to tell you. There's something in there of like some equivalent thing. Okay, well, what's equivalent to not eating meat? You figure that out.
Choose your own penance.
Yeah, is it going for a walk around the block?
I don't use as much ketchup on my French fries when I have my hamburger on Friday. It's really a penance for me because I really like ketchup on my fries.
Don't put A1 on that steak.
Yeah.
But for the Sunday obligation, you can go read Canon 1248. It says that it's still a little ambiguous, but I guess it gets one level of clarity here. It says you have to engage in prayer for an appropriate amount of time personally or in your family setting or in a group of families. So, my read on that, and I think, some others have read it as well. If you're in Mass for like an hour and a half, if you go to a traditional Latin Mass, spend at least that amount of time in prayer. I mean, you could do a liturgy of the word type of thing at home with your family.
And of course, there was a situation that there were so many live-streamed masses, and obviously there are many people who, don't have access to a live-stream mass. But if they're watching this, they clearly do, because this is put out on the internet, which is where all these masses were live-streamed. There were many, many opportunities to do so. Your parish may have done it, and then there were various parishes and places that did do that. I think the thing that I would say, and this is for all of our viewers to kind of go back and look on, and it's like, okay, when you went to Mass prior to COVID, when you were going to Mass, you would obviously get up and you'd get dressed. If you were a guy, you'd have a shave. You go out and you go, I hope you have a shave. You go out to Mass and there you are at the church and you have now made I've gone somewhere and I've done something and there I am. Okay, when you did the live streamed Mass, what did you do? Was this a roll out of bed? With like 10 minutes to go and just kind of like, yeah, fine, I'm in my bathrobe and I'm watching Mass. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the live stream, you're supposed to participate with the Mass. The actual experience of participating with a Mass that is occurring in the sanctuary and with you in the pews, with the exception of going up for communion, your experience is fundamentally the same. You're watching a thing happen and you're praying along with it. You're participating along with it. You're not doing other things. You're not sitting there sipping a cup of coffee in the pews. You're not sitting there, getting up to go check on the breakfast. You're not sitting there flipping through your phone and stuff. You are there and present and prayerfully engaging. That's what we're talking about. That's what they're talking about there with this prayer. My question would be, because I know that there were people who did not do this, did you do that real attentive focus on the Mass, or was it like, yeah, click, I've turned it on the TV and I'm treating it like it's the ball game, or not even the ball game, I'm treating it just like it's something that's going on in the background and this sort of stuff. My wife and I, we got up, we got dressed, I put on a suit, and I sat in my living room and we had like little kneelers set up so that we could kneel down in the appropriate point, and that was it. There was nothing else, and that's what we did. So we went to Mass.
Well, if you don't have internet perhaps or something, even setting aside that time for breviary or for Bible reading or for rosary or something to sanctify the day is the thing. One final take on that before moving on. We have the Saskatchewan out in Straight Pride in Saskatchewan, the schools we'll go to in a minute. But one final thing on this here, we keep saying that nobody knew anything back in the early COVID time, and yet, and how could the bishops be so on board with shutting everything down if it wasn't really that much of a mandate to begin with? And we're moving into a period, well, we have been there for quite a while, about how democratic how blue the bishops really are, how they will take the democratic talking points. If you want to see how the red states and the blue states were different with regard to how severe the restrictions were, how quickly they were lifted, there's a big difference between, South Dakota governor and Michigan governor. And it's not, the fact that they're both women is about the only similarities I have on that. The fact is that the bishops as well were aping the blue state talking points far more than they were the red state talking points. So I thought it's interesting to see not only how they talk about immigration and gun control and how they don't talk about abortion and these things, and when something like this comes along, you'll find them talking the blue talking points again, the Democratic line. They're towing the party line. And I'm wondering what's in it for them. Why is this? I know there's millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars coming from the Democratic political machine each year from Washington that goes to the bishops to fund all the different, immigration. They get, I don't know how many tens. It's hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's billions.
Get.
They've gotten billions so far.
Over collectively.
Yeah.
So they're aping the blue talking point, and they did early on. So to understand, if you say, oh, we're just all in the fuzz, we couldn't really figure. Well, why are you always down the blue, line?
President was a Republican at the time. And this was a federal mandate. A lot of this stuff was federally pushed. I mean, we can't give Trump a pass on this one. Trump was the one who came down and shut it down on a federal level. Fine, there was a lot of freedom given out for individual states, but you know what? They were, in a lot of cases, following the line of the federal government. You come along and you say, oh, Fauci, a man employed by Donald Trump, Donald Trump had the ability to get rid of this guy. Didn't even try. All of these people. I mean, who came up with the vaccine? There was Operation Warp Speed that Trump came up with the vaccine. He was the one pushing it at that point and being, this is the thing we want to do. While I agree that the Democrat, the Democratic talking points are very, very common.
On the state level, where you have the difference between Michigan and the difference between South Dakota
but
or
you know
Florida.
What was the difference between the federal government and like your average blue state? There wasn't. And the federal government was Republican. I think that is something that we need to accept. This wasn't just a case of like, the evil Democrats and the bishops are like, latching onto the Democratic positions. Certainly, but no, everybody was talking about lockdowns. Everyone was talking about lockdowns. And to be honest, at March, people were saying, okay, the lockdowns are necessary and a good idea because this is a dangerous disease that is easily spread. The question isn't, should we have had some degree of isolation, some degree of lockdown, some degree of, not going out into vast communities. That was the Great Barrington Declaration. When all the doctors came out and they signed onto the Great Barrington Declaration that said, look, we need to isolate the people who are particularly vulnerable, the very young, the very old, the comorbidity and stuff, and everyone else needs to essentially carry on and get this thing gradually. Bear in mind, the lockdowns were not initially were not pitched to stop transmission and to stop the disease going anywhere. They were pitched to say we need to stop the overwhelming of the hospital systems because everyone is going to get this because it is essentially a flu-like virus and everyone gets infected. That's what was initially said. That's what the Great Barrington Declaration said. That's what the original 2 weeks to flatten the curve was about. It was so you don't get everyone infected all at once and so the hospitals don't get overwhelmed. That is the problem with what the bishops did. The bishops said, okay, we're just going to lock everything down, as opposed to saying, hey guys, we'll let you have your choice with regard to it. At which point the old and the sick and the infirm could have stayed at home and could have done mass from their couch and could have watched it live streamed on EWTN or whatever. But no, instead we said, okay, there are no sacraments. It doesn't matter if you get this disease and die. We're not going to come and bury you. We're not going to come and give you last rites. That's the problem. This is the issue. The issue is that we've all forgotten what happened 3 years ago. And now there's this narrative that it was like it was there to stop the disease. It was never to stop the disease. It was to limit the infection rate. Very quickly, it became apparent that that was not necessary, that there was not this overwhelming of the hospital systems. They sat there and hospital beds were not, absolutely packed in many, many places. There were lots of emergency places set up that were not really used. And then people carried on with the lockdowns when it was clear it was unnecessary, including the bishops. What was it? It was after Pentecost, or it was close to Pentecost before we got it opened back up?
Something like that.
Yeah.
It felt like forever.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to get to bad stuff in Canada happening, as Brad mentioned, but I do just want to add something as we close up on this point. People were comparing this, rightly and wrongly, I think, to the bubonic plague, as to where there were some people who ended up on the position of, well, the bishops and the Pope and the Church can never shut down any of the sacraments. And I really would caution people from going that far because they do have the juridical authority to suspend the public sacraments in certain circumstances, and it's not totally unprecedented. I mean, worldwide, the Pope doing that, I think that was unprecedented. But it's not unprecedented for a bishop to do that because that was actually done in certain circumstances to a limited degree during the bubonic plague. You had, public masses being canceled. But, however, the bishops, the popes at the times, they were a lot better about providing people with other options. Obviously they didn't have the internet, no live stream masses. But what would they do? I mean, these guys, risked their lives. We talked about Aloysius Gonzaga, all the rest, who would go out and say, no, I don't care if I die doing this. I'm going to go and minister the sacraments to people. They would have outdoor masses. They would have masses, processions in the streets, and they would tell people, open your windows and participate in mass that way. So they were very vigilant about telling people how to actually still worship God. And as shepherds, they were still active. They weren't just hiding in a basement like Joe Biden somewhere. They were active. They were with the people administering the sacraments.
Yeah, so what else we got coming out of Canada?
Well, yes, I guess we'll stick with me. So you mentioned Saskatchewan. Recently we had a group of high school students reacting to so-called Pride Month. And if you go to public schools in the U.S., if you go to public schools, especially in Canada, you are, as a student there, probably forced to endure some of this Pride stuff. Posters, there's probably lesson plans going up. So a group of high school students in Saskatchewan made a poster of their own, and it wasn't anything like too big or gaudy. It was like an 8x10 printed out page, and they simply they had some kind of graphic on there, and they wrote "straight and proud." So these Canadian high schoolers said,
"That's hate speech."
Exactly, yeah, and that's what they literally said. That's what they said, because so they did this and they hung it up on a bulletin board in the school, and a handful of kids signed it or whatever, and they actually this was so hateful, and it was so, I think they called it bullying or whatever. To say that you're straight and proud of it is apparently bullying to someone else. Not to,
when they can say they're out and proud.
Yeah, vice versa.
Right.
It just doesn't work the same way, Brad. But they actually, this was so bad. They didn't just get, they didn't just have to take the poster down. They didn't just have to get called in the principal's office. But the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties, had to come in and set these kids straight and say that they said that it was borderline. I don't know what borderline hate speech actually is, but that's what. And they didn't tell the parents about it either.
Wow.
If I was a kid and you had my kid talk to the police for something he got in trouble for, and you didn't tell me, I'd be all over you.
See, that's the scary part, where you don't involve. But we're not involving kids, parents down here. When the kid's saying, "I want to be a girl," or "Boy, I want to be a girl," or have sex change and all that, we're reporting on stuff like that, where they're saying, "Well, no, it's by law. You don't have to inform the parents on this." Really? If they want to go on some outing somewhere, you got to have the parents' permission slip. Go on a field trip. But if he wants to have a sex change, you don't have to tell me about it. That's not right. But that's the thing. Why can't we be, happy that we're, cisgender? Let's just say that.
You just can't ever say. And
okay.
That's apparently one of them.
Well, and to be fair, you can see the argument, because nobody comes out and says, before all the gays came out and said, "I'm proud to be gay," no straight person was going out and saying, "I'm proud to be straight."
Because it's normal.
Exactly. That's the point. So the reaction there to say, this is
normal for them. Yeah. Okay.
Well, no. This is not, those teens are not engaging in behavior which is just kind of saying, "Hey, I want to be identified as a group myself like they are." This isn't like they're coming on and saying, no, this is a reaction to and a mocking of that. Now, the fact that...
And it should be mocked.
Exactly.
Darn right.
It should be mocked, and mocking it should be permissible, and and all of these things. But you know what? That's not the law in Canada. And I think this is a thing that Americans have to wrap their heads around, that the Bill of Rights does not exist elsewhere. The very first principle of freedom of speech does not exist in other countries, period. Places go along and say, we have a robust free speech tradition. Okay, but it's not enshrined in the Constitution. It's not enshrined in law. It's not a thing that you have. The number of times people come along and they just have this notion that everywhere in the world has freedom of speech. No, they don't. The United States has it, a handful of other countries, and you know what? A bunch of these places that you think are essentially just America with the saturation turned down, like Canada and Australia and all of these kind of places, they do not have freedom of speech.
They're very different.
And that's the point. So you can come along and people say, well, this is hate speech. And it's like, okay, that's a serious crime in those countries. The fact that these countries are wrong to not have that, and you can sit there and argue and say the United States Constitution is better and everywhere needs a Bill of Rights, everywhere needs a First Amendment, whatever, fine, these are all arguments, but welcome to the real world where we live, and yeah, these places do not have that, at which point that's why this happens to these kids.
Well, all the more admirable for these kids to do
100%.
something like this, because they probably knew that their repercussions for their actions would be a little more severe. You're talking about Pride Month. I hate calling it that. I only say it that because nobody else knows what June is. But Pride Month.
Month of the Sacred Heart.
Month of the Sacred Heart. That's what it should be.
Red, not pink.
But there was a Pride parade in Toronto, and to talk about just how normalized the government has made sodomy and just sexual degradation. men were walking around with their genitalia out, and there were children there, and a man called up the cops and said, "Hey, there are men flashing their genitals at children." And the cop's like, "Oh, whoa, this is not good. Where is this?" "Oh, it's at the Pride Parade." The cop goes, "Yeah, they do that there. So it's legal there, but not somewhere else." And the cop's like, "Yeah.
Yeah.
All right."
You know, the interesting,
Wow.
we were talking about the whole COVID thing and all the restrictions. The thing that flashed in my mind was in 2020, we had you had to wear masks, I mean, like everywhere, okay? And some people would say you have to wear them indoors, right? And you see people in their own car with their windows rolled up tight, you know, and they're sitting and they're breathing.
only one in the
and they're
car.
only one person in there for hours and they're breathing in their own mask. It's like, dude, you can take your mask off there. But that being said, also when Floyd, George Floyd died, and God rest his soul, and it's unfortunate. But then the BLMers all started rioting.
Right.
None of them were wearing masks.
No, they didn't distance either.
And they didn't social distance.
Yeah,
So all of a sudden, all the mainstream media stopped talking about the need to wear masks and social
distancing. The doctrine didn't apply to them. So this leftist doctrine of you need to do what we say, but then when a select group that is in their good favor doesn't follow it for weeks, and that's the least of what they do. They burn down
buildings,
all sorts of stuff, and hardly anybody got charged. Never mind any of that, but they didn't follow the doctrine. So the doctrine that the leftists imposed is not for them to follow. They can follow it or not follow it. They follow it when they get points, social points, and look at me, look how virtuous I am in my car driving with my one mask on. I'm protecting people.
Oh, you just wore one mask?
Yeah.
Dude.
Darn it.
I had three,
I didn't get as many points for that one, darn it.
Each one of the colors, you can kind of see the layers.
Rainbow masks, yeah.
For private.
But yeah, and the fact that, the BLM rioters and everything like that, they didn't follow it. Yeah, the left wasn't like, oh my gosh, why are they not doing this? Because it wasn't expected of them. Those are only for us to follow. Those diktats are for us to follow. The doctrines apply to us, not to them.
We saw that with many of the leaders out there in California, Gavin Newsom and Whitmer and other Pelosi, that they were at their hairdresser or out to eat or whatever.
Yeah.
There was no
Partying,
no mask
big
or anything.
dinner parties with their friends.
And that was like on a regular basis. You'd see somebody reporting on one of the leftist leaders that were not following the doctrine.
Yeah. Well, it just goes to show that if you have the right political ideology, you're impervious to certain things like COVID-19.
Yeah.
Yes. See, that right there is the real cure. Yes.
Become blue. Yeah.
But also regarding this showing kids nudity and like horrific sexual things at these pride parades, these guys think that I was looking up like how these people justify. How do they justify to themselves and to others? Because I guess for lack of a better term, the pride community is kind of torn. They're saying, well, we want family-friendly pride parades, and other ones are like, we want orgies and just let the kids come and watch, kind of a thing. And the family-friendly ones are losing out to the whole orgy thing, because basically what they're saying is that these displays are a celebration. We're repressed, we're hated, we can't hold hands, we can't kiss, we can't do this, we can't. So I guess they have orgies in the street, and so to them it's not crude because it's them letting people, it's part of this virtue signaling. It's like they can have these grotesque, horrific sexual things in front of children. If it were in some other situation, it would be horrific. But because they're doing it and they're saying, I'm being my me, and this is my right, and I'm repressed and everything, I'm bringing attention to this, therefore it's a good thing, so let the kids watch it. And I think that's how they justify the drag queen story hours, having these weird drag clowns in front of people. These guys are stripping and doing all sorts of things in front of kids, and they're saying, well, these kids need to know what my struggle is, even though these kids, barely understand anything. But yeah, you need to understand the drag clowns and the homo perverts.
This is the thing too. I wish guys like Dolan, it's easy, 3 years after the fact, you kind of look back and throw the question out there that, did I really do a good job or not? But probably did. But where are they at that time when you need them? Where are they now when there's 101 other attacks on the family with the gender confused and the homosexual presentation in front of children, whether it's in the streets and the drag queen story in the schools? And why does this all have to be put in front of children anyway? Where are the shepherds out there? I would think if you had some bishop like Bishop John Fisher back in the day, and he saw some of this stuff going on, he would be out there in the street saying, hey, this is not right. You need to stop this now, and I'm going to have 1,000 people behind me tomorrow in the same street protesting this.
Well, to be fair, Bishop Fisher was the only bishop.
Yeah.
Out of how many bishops were in England at the time?
Be martyred.
One.
Yeah.
Everybody else flipped.
Yep.
So.
And it's Fisher could have had 1,000 people, because there were 1,000 people there to do it. Could Dolan get 1,000 people? And I think that's a very legitimate question. If Dolan woke up and said, okay, fine, you know what, I was wrong about COVID and I don't want to be wrong about the next thing, and he, suddenly grew a spine, could he find people? Because this is the bishop going out there and saying, hey, this is terrible, this is wrong. He would get shouted down by his own flock, because the vast majority of Catholics out there, all they want is just to get along. The vast majority of people out there aren't down with this homosexuality. I would question, to be honest, Rodney, if the vast majority of the people participating in this grotesque perversion at these pride parades are really down with it. Or is it just I've just got to go along with this because this is what the movement is, and I've got to go. Yeah. And it takes a great degree of courage to do, as some people have said, like the Christine and I spoke about it, the LGB without the T and the get the L out, and all of these movements that are saying, whoa, this is not good. What's happening to the pride movement is not good. This is not my pride movement. This is not what I want. Those people are this tiny minority with courage. Everyone else is just kind of going along with it. Most Catholics, they just want to be left alone, which is it's not any good. You don't change the world. You don't sustain the world. You don't preserve civilization by saying, I just want to be left alone. Because you know what? You won't get left alone. And that's the thing. But yeah, these people are going to be going, hey, you know what? Yeah, can I get to watch my sports on a Sunday? Can I get to watch my sports on Sunday? Can I get to have my decent 401k? Can I get to make sure that I can go to the grocery store and I can buy stuff and the inflation isn't too bad? That's what most people are concerned about. Maybe they go to Mass on a Sunday and they sleep through the homily, and if the priest said anything that challenges them, they'd be offended. And they're like, how dare you call me out? I'm a good person. I'm not murdering anyone. I go to church on a Sunday. Yeah, you're going to hell.
It sounds like
all these people are going to hell.
I think another hard line.
Well, this is a hard line. This is exactly what hard line is.
Now you don't have to watch hard line. Because we already have one right here. It's kind of embedded in the show.
It's all okay.
The fact that it took 50 years, and the big T word for every Sunday was toleration.
Mm-hmm.
Tolerate. And we never were taught that that evil that you're tolerating really is an evil, and it needs to actually be countered when and if you can, but not just toleration. Toleration is somehow a virtue that I can tolerate the more evil than you can tolerate. Oh, really? I can out tolerate you any day. I mean, it's not a virtue. It's something you tolerate with patience, and that means suffering. That until if and when you can actually get some handle on it. But the fact that these bishops took 50 years to get us to this point, and they're priests, and I'm going to tell you, bishops, because I know many priests over the decades, this has been going decades that I know, that priests said, I preached on contraception and my bishop canned me. I preached on abortion and my bishop said, one more homily on abortion, you're out. I preached on same-sex marriage or homosexuality. I mentioned that from the pulpit, and he said, nope. And they continually got hit over the head, and they knew that. And all they had to do was have anybody in the parish complain a little bit to the bishop, and the bishop takes their side, the angry mob side. So, and it took 50 years. Yes, Dolan would have an uphill battle when you start moving that needle back. Granted, on Judgment Day, he's going to be asked by our Lord, did you try to move that needle back, or were you actually moving it forward into more of this nebulous toleration era? If people don't get along with him. There will be some that do, and I have to say, since 2014, I've been working here from 2014, writing articles and reports and whatever, and the articles that got the greatest traction out there was any time, very rarely, that a bishop stood up about something. You would get a Burke or Sarah, back in the day, Vigano, early on. There was bishops that would stand up and say something in defense of the faith. And it was like, wow, a regular article, 150 shares, 200 shares, one of these, 2,000 shares, right? It would just go and go and go. You had 30,000 people reading it, just because it was a bishop standing up, saying the same thing that any layperson could do. But when he's wearing a mitre, it carries weight. And over time, it starts affecting the fence sitters out there, saying, oh, really? That's kind of an interesting thing. And that's what has to be done still. It has to be the church leaders who are leading instead of pulling back on people who are trying to do something good. And if that doesn't happen, and it is a fact that the bishops will be copying the Democratic Party's talking points over and over and over again. Almost all the social justice issues, instead of talking about the red issues in the sense of blood, flesh and blood, the life issues, real life issues, such as abortion and contraception, the no-fault divorce, family, the transgender, all of those things that are clearly cut and dried. Is it really cut and dried, the quota that we have to accept from South America of the number of people that we have to let across the border? And it's not really cut and dried. There's policies and principles and things like that, and give and take and all that. But whether you can spread pornography, use pornography, whether you can actually contract a same-sex marriage, whether you can actually have just complete no-fault divorce. I'm on my, King Henry VIII style. Whether you can go ahead and abortion and all these things. Those are clear, cut, and dried things. Although I thank Obamacare for actually bringing out, curing the laryngitis of the bishops on contraception. Because until 2012, you didn't hear a peep from the bishops on contraception. All of a sudden, from the pulpit, they're starting to say, well, we can't support Obamacare because it contains this line on contraception. And people in the pews are like scratching their head like, what? Contraception is bad? Really? But you haven't said anything about that for 50 years.
It's kind of the only thing they say about it. They still, a lot of Catholics still use it and everything. So, like you said before, you don't hear from the pulpit.
And that's the point. Bishops are not using contraception. Fundamentally, bishops are not using contraception, priests are not using contraception, lay people are using contraception. And you know what? Lay people listen to lay people. Maybe. The people who are using contraception stopped listening to the bishops decades ago because the bishops do say contraception's bad. You know what? They stopped listening to the church. The people who need to listen to the church stopped listening to all of the church with collars on decades ago. That's why they're not listening to the church. They stopped ages ago. They're done. Now we've got to get this situation where the laity need to go and talk to their friends, talk to their families, and start this. Sheen is constantly, quoted as, it's up to you, the laity, to save the church. Okay, congratulations. Here's how you save the church. You go and you persuade one person in your circle of friends or your family of the truth of Catholicism. That's it.
Well, Dolan actually did admit somewhere along around 2016 or so, 2017, it was an actual statement by him using the words, well, we kind of got laryngitis with Humanae Vitae. And he admits right there, just like he's admitting here, well, maybe we did go too far in shutting down the whole Mass. Maybe we should have spoke up more about contraception. And he admits, we the bishops, he said, and it's in a statement to the bishops on it, that he says, we got laryngitis there. You know what? You never did get your voice back. And that laryngitis with contraception turned into abortion, which was the fallback if your contraception fails, and then the misunderstanding of what marriage is even about, because once you take children out, and then you get the no-fault divorce, even with the idea, once again, what marriage is about, what even man and woman are about there, and you get into same-sex marriage. And it's just one right after the other. They never did get their voice back. And then probably about 2-3 years ago, the whole transgender thing even flares up even more. Dolan was asked specifically about the whole transgender thing. He said, well, why don't you go talk to the Protestant community? We reported on that. And he passed the buck to them. They're a little more vocal about it than we are. okay, you know, restrictions on the Mass were probably the least of your problem, because that was like a narrow window. This lack of catechesis that Burke is talking about, Father Hardin's talking about, the crisis in the church owing to a lack of catechesis for 50 years is what they're saying. And that falls squarely on the shoulder of the bishops.
You know, if Dolan teaches us anything, he shows us that the episcopate is a very cushy gig. Because all you have to do is royally screw up a few years ago, and probably decades and decades before that, right? And then a few years later come along and issue a squishy apology, and we'll
Didn't really apologize.
Not
Just sort of
really.
asked, should I apologize?
And then we all go along our merry way.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. Or you can be like McCarrick and just get to resign and, you know, ride off into the sunset with other millions that you have stashed away. Anyway, thanks for joining us for this episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, making Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina,
Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Eve. Ad te suspiramus gementes et flentes. In hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, ilos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.